Allison.
Hi.
As always, we have some stuff to talk about today.
We do.
On this here episode of This Might Be Nothing, I have a topic that actually might be nothing, but it might be something. So I want to talk about honesty and the problem with honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And what really got me on thinking about this was a visit to the doctor's office not that long ago. I went in for my physical.
Mm-hmm.
And as I sat there and filled out all 600 forms, and had to put my name, I had to put the same information on every single form. And it just got me thinking, like, why? This is so frustrating, so annoying or whatever. And then it got me thinking, like, why is it that way? And so, like, I asked my wife, who was the doctor, let's be honest. It was her office. And I was like, why is it this way? And she was like, well, it's a HIPAA law that you have to have 2 pieces of identifying information on every single piece of paper about a patient. Therefore, your name and your date of birth. And I was like, oh, well, no one's ever said that before. Now it makes sense why I have, still annoying, but now I understand that it's not just the doctor's office being lazy or whatever. And I thought, what an unbelievably simple thing that just happened, where it was a very frustrating thing for me, but the doctor's office never thought to tell the patient about it. Like, what? So then I started spiraling, and I started thinking about even more stuff. So if we rewind back to 2004, when Hurricane Helene came breezing through.
It was not 2004.
24. That's
yes.
what I meant. 2024.
So close.
20 years off there. So you don't want to roll back that far. Roll back to 2024. Yes, Helene blows through, knocks out everything. And we are without power and without internet services here in the Greenville, South Carolina area, amongst many other areas, right? And I just remember at the time that Spectrum, the internet provider for the large majority of folks around here, went absolutely silent about everything. And on the flip side, Duke Power, Duke Energy, which is the monopoly energy provider in the upstate, went absolutely broke their backs to communicate with everybody. Like literally day one, it was like, hey guys, shit's bad. We're going to go take a look and see what we're working with here. If you'll be patient with us, as soon as we know what we're dealing with, we will get back to you with some updates and our plans for how we're going to schedule our rollouts to get this fixed. And then almost daily, I felt like we got text messages and emails from Duke Energy, a monopoly who has zero opportunity to lose customers.
Right.
Was bending over backwards to communicate and be honest about what they were doing. Meanwhile, Spectrum, who has every opportunity to lose customers to Starlink, to AT&T, to Verizon, to insert any number of local providers, went completely silent. Because I'm assuming their fear was, well, if we tell people how bad it actually is, they're going to get frustrated and they're going to leave. So let's just not say anything. And boy, were people pissed. So what is the problem with this, right? Why is it so hard for a company to be honest this way when it seems like a really easy thing to do?
Yeah, and I don't know, was Spectrum's play there? Did they think that we wouldn't notice that things were bad? Because it's almost like they assume their customer won't notice unless they point it out. Right. But everyone's very aware because we don't have internet.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know who runs Spectrum or who's in charge of those kind of decisions, but I suspect that it was like, well, a couple things at play. Like maybe they were completely caught off guard. Maybe their infrastructure was not ready for something like this. So that's already something bad. They should have been ready for something like this. Or, so maybe they wanted to not tell people how bad it was because they didn't want to look ill-prepared. Maybe they didn't want to tell people how bad it was because they knew that it would take them weeks, maybe months to get it all fixed, and they just knew people would bail.
And I think that is a great example of if there's a void of information, people fill that with the worst possible scenario.
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you said that, right? So let's actually go back. I mean, I'm being facetious when I say the problem with honesty, and technically what we're talking about is not honesty per se. It's actually Some of it is, but I'm saying, but I think you're absolutely right. It's really what it is a gap between what the customer knows and what the brand is not filling.
Right.
I can't use my words, but you know what I'm saying. So
Yes.
there's that information gap. And in the absence of that information, yeah, I think us humans, as lovely as we are going to fill that with the worst possible scenarios in our head. So in our heads, we're thinking Spectrum's not saying anything. So that means they haven't even noticed that their service is down. Like this is going to take,
or that they're culpable. They were ill prepared. You know,
Right.
like you were like, well, maybe their infrastructure wasn't, and you assume that because if they're not coming out saying, "Hey, here's the deal. We're on it. We're responsible. We're handling it." You assume that it feels like they're hiding something. So you assume there's something to hide.
Exactly.
And then you go down the rabbit hole of they're a bad company or bad service or when if they would just tell you what's up and own it, then you feel like you're interacting with someone trustworthy and it alleviates all that negativity.
Right. And, you know, the thing is even if the brand sort of reveals where they are in the process and it doesn't make you happy, but at least it removes the assumption of malice or whatever.
Yes,
you know what I'm saying?
That.
So like if Spectrum, and man, are we picking on Spectrum today? But like if they had come out and said, y'all, we were not prepared. We have not kept up with maintenance like we should have. And so this hit us way harder than we anticipated. We are so sorry about that, but here's how we're going to fix it. I still would have been pissed as a customer because I'd have been like, well, I pay you all this money and you're not even maintaining your own shit. I still would have been pissed, but at the same time, it would have removed that whole layer of what are they doing? They're stealing our money and, you know, they don't even care that we don't have service. So,
I mean, it's like a kid. If a kid comes to you and they made a mistake, but they're honest about it, it takes the venom out of you immediately.
It really
then
does.
you have compassion for them and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, Spectrum, that a hurricane came through the upstate, which has never, ever, ever, ever happened.
Right.
Like, how were you to know?
Right.
But when they hide it or it just feels...
It feels like there's an element of malice there.
Yes.
And then of course, if you look at the outcomes of that, of taking the positive approach that Duke Energy did, this is the part that absolutely blows my mind. Like, when was the last time you were just like, you know what? I love my power utility. Just love them, you know?
Never.
Right. But everybody, especially when the fact that Duke was pitted against Spectrum, like there were conversations online, on Reddit, social media. I mean, like people were pitting those two against each other like, hey, Spectrum, why don't you call Duke Energy and learn how to manage your shit? Because people were so, happy is not the right word, but they were really thrilled with Duke Energy's ability to manage that whole thing.
And I feel like Duke, through their clear, honest, and frequent communication, took it from everyone being adversarial to Duke to where we all became Team Duke.
Kinda.
People were taking lineman meals when they saw the trucks out there.
Right.
People were doing everything they could to help them because we felt like Duke is doing all they can. We are informed and we're all on the same team trying to get our community power back.
Absolutely right.
Instead of they're the enemy and they're...
Meanwhile, anytime you saw the first time you saw a Spectrum truck, you were like, where the hell have you been?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Why did I see AT&T out here 4 days ago?
Yeah. So I want to... So now that we've established what we're talking about here, and the whole episode is not us bitching about companies who do this poorly. You know, what I want to talk about is like what this means for a brand, because I think, and I even want to go so far as to say, I think I have I don't even think, I know why companies get this way. So, let's talk about how it gets this way. And we'll keep picking on Spectrum. When something goes wrong, you can clearly, especially with a large organization, the first thing you're going to hear from your legal team is keep your mouth shut so that we don't get sued by whatever. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you've got those pressures. You've got potentially a PR team saying, keep your mouth shut so that we don't have this massive blowback and, piss off our, stockholders or whatever. Or, you've got engineering saying, keep your mouth shut because we don't want our competitors to know how we've done whatever. So, I mean, I get it. There's all of these pressures. within an organization that probably are making the CEO or the communications director or whoever is responsible for communicating outside of those company walls, immense pressures on them to make sure that they're appeasing all of those parties. So it's easy to see how a company gets there. But I would argue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, I would argue that that's a brand culture problem, not so much a policy, legal, PR problem. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's definitely a brand problem. And I think that what struck me as you were saying that is like people don't treat their customers like they're intelligent. I think,
I think there's
and
a lot
like
of companies guilty of that. Yeah.
and like they're people.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, your customers, treat them like they're intelligent, treat them like they're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
When you try to hide everything, you're essentially assuming that your customers too dumb to figure it out, or too like we just won't know,
or or just that you hope they don't figure it out.
Yeah.
But I can't figure out why that is a thing, because it seems like it doesn't cost a whole lot of money to just fill that information gap. And so the reason I think it is a culture problem is that, we've talked before many a times about brand, obviously how important it is externally, right? And how that reflects on customers. They choose brands that they can relate with, blah, blah, blah. But we also talk quite a bit about how important brand is internally for your own internal culture.
Immensely.
And how much it can influence that. And so to me, it's like if you're in an organization that cannot just fill that information gap with honesty and like, here's what's happened, here's what we're going to do about it, then you are not empowered internally to take on that risk. And so what I mean by that is like everyone within an organization should be like, should if you have a brand culture that promotes doing the right thing, or taking ownership of something until it's done right, or hey, you're not going to get in trouble if you do the right thing in order to save face for us later on down the line. I have an example of that, because I'm a car geek, and so I'm always making car references, but like Toyota manufacturing, of course, is known worldwide for being one of the best at what they do, because everything that, and they actually have a philosophy behind their manufacturing process that almost every other car company has adopted across the world. I will butcher the name of it, so I'm not going to say. There's actually a name for it that I'm not going to say, because it's like Kasian something.
Okay.
Whatever. One of the premises of that is no one will ever be punished for stopping the production line, for finding a problem or whatever. So meaning that the lowest of the low floor workers have the authority and the ability to stop the production line, and they will not get punished for it. And the whole point of that is to encourage people to find things wrong, to prevent bad things from happening later on down the line.
Yep.
And if you go back, I happen to be a Land Rover fan. They have a storied past because they've made very unreliable vehicles for the longest time. Storied past. And doing research on, kind of these manufacturing processes, there was a time in the 70s and 80s for the Rover group that they would absolutely punish you if you stopped the line, because that meant, the minute the line stops, you're losing money.
Right.
And what that ended up doing was like somebody would see something go by that was not up to spec or whatever and be like, well, I'm not going to get in trouble for that. That's not my problem. So they inadvertently had this culture problem of not my problem. I'm just not whatever, versus the Toyota method. Everyone was empowered to do the right thing for the company. That's what I'm talking about with a brand that allows this to happen.
Yes, because I feel like it has to be a top-down directive. I mean, Spectrum had to be getting hundreds of thousands of calls constantly.
I'm certain of it.
And in that situation, unless you have really great corporate structure of communication, which obviously Spectrum would have had email, social media, a lot of opportunities, but they were getting tons of calls. You're putting so much pressure on your lowest level public facing employees, because they're the ones who are going to be constantly bearing the brunt.
Right.
And so it really does have to be like, I feel like it has to be a directive and empowerment, like a mantra of like, from the top down, to be honest, tell the truth, even when it's difficult or it's an uncomfortable conversation, especially when it's an uncomfortable conversation.
And it's not that like magically this is going to solve all of your problems inside of a brand to say, you know what, to the call center folks who are answering the calls, like we empower you to tell the customer the truth. And that's magically going to fix all our problems. It absolutely will not. But it's this long-term thinking. So like we always beat the drum at Slant because of like long-term thinking for brands. Like we've also gotten into this weird cycle of like, let's just focus on the immediate, quarterly returns, blah, blah, blah. And so thinking long-term, you have to remember that going back to the Spectrum example, that if you tell them the truth, right, that we didn't plan for this, or our infrastructure was not maintained properly. And, as a customer, I still may choose to leave and go to another company that I feel has a better job of that. But at the same time, I also probably might not, especially when you're in a position of like, if you have any understanding that a customer hates almost all utility companies, period, or massive corporations in general. So if I have to pick between two shitty companies, that I don't like, I'm probably going to choose the one that was straightforward with me. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? You're just building a little bit of brand affinity there.
Yeah, brand loyalty.
And so that means your customers stick around instead of losing the customers, and which clearly costs you money to try and retain them and all that and the other. So like it's to have this culture from the top down of empowering your internal workforce to do the right thing for your brand. It doesn't cost anything. Doesn't cost anything at all. And the return on it is pretty substantial if you do it right. So I can't figure out why this doesn't happen more often.
Fear is the only reason I could assume.
Right.
Because it would be so simple. And I just had a thought and I lost it.
That's the story of my life.
Yeah, no, so, yeah, I mean, it would be so simple for them to go ahead and be open and honest. And I also feel like one of the most frustrating things for me as a human being right now is that I feel like I'm in a world of businesses, not people. Mm-hmm. Every single time I try to interact with anybody that I'm a customer of, it is transfer from phone line to phone line, or submit this to a chat bot, and with 24 hours they'll contact me back, and usually that person has no clue what's going on because I talked to a chat bot the first time. Right. And so I feel like there's also a part of like humanity connecting to humanity. I feel like it is much harder. I feel like it's easy to be mad at a company that you're hearing nothing from versus a human being type interaction. When you get that communication, it feels more personal, it feels more human. Yep. And then it's so easy to villainize a company. Oh, yeah. It's very hard to villainize a person who comes to you and says, hey, I messed up, or hey, I'm in a bad spot, or hey, this has happened, but I'm doing my best to fix it. And here's my plan, and I'm going to keep you updated and informed. It just takes all the vitriol out of you, you know?
I fully agree.
Because it does feel like we're in a world of like Amazon, AT&T, like, even Duke Power sometimes, where it's like Blue Cross Blue Shield, where you're just constantly, you can't talk to anybody. No, there's nobody to talk to.
Definitely lost all the plot on human conversation with any of these organizations.
Yeah, and I feel like honesty and transparency just makes it feel more human. Right. And yeah, it just changes something in you emotionally when you're dealing with another human being. Who admits, especially if you admit fault. I think there's something endearing, or like,
because we've all made. I mean, Jesus, we're all humans. And so, we actually had a whole episode previously on this whole thing of just like frictionless, and the age of frictionless, where you're trying to like treat customers like how do we get their money as fast as possible with as little effort as possible, and then no one really owns the process, and so. And again, I want to go back and say, like, every episode, it sounds like this guy is falling, get off my lawn, yelling at clouds, and we hate everything. And that's not true. We're observing what's happening with brands and what's getting lost and what's getting better. And so like technology has enabled quite a few really great things. I mean, like,
I would argue we love people and we're just noticing things that are,
yeah, I think that's what it is.
like,
Or, I think the older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing that like I understand I'm going to have to spend money on things that I don't like utility bills and insurance and all that stuff. I'm fully aware that I'm going to have to do that. But can we make it a little less miserable by closing some of this information gap? So Thrive Family Medicine plug, which is which is my doctor's office, has started doing this really wonderful thing, and I cannot figure out why we don't see this more often. Is like they have this whole section on their website that's dedicated to FAQs, and it's not dumb FAQs like, what should I bring for my first visit? There is some of that, but I'm saying it's stuff like, why do I have to show up 15 minutes early and then sit in the waiting room for 15 minutes? And then they explain why. And like, it's because the EMR system that they're using sometimes doesn't scan in your insurance card correctly. And they end up having to put it all in by hand all over again. And if that takes 10 minutes and you're 10 minutes late to see the doctor, then you have ruined the schedule for everybody else that day, including the next patient. And I was like, okay, actually, I understand the logic there. And, it was so incredible. Like, it was literally every frustration you've had as a patient, the question is there, and they are flat out answering it. And it may not be an answer you love, but again, they're at least explaining why it is the way that it is.
Right.
And that makes it like, oh, doctors aren't the assholes here. It's actually the insurance company or it's some silly law or regulation or whatever. It's very rarely the people there at the office deciding they just want to make your life hell.
Right.
But that's the thing, is we as patients assume that's what they're doing when the information gap is there. For some reason, we just assume doctors are money-grubbing assholes when actually they're in the business of being a doctor to help people.
Yeah, it's like it reminds me of something my therapist told me a couple of years ago, which is like, everybody's always like, well, what if this bad thing happens? And nobody ever thinks, well, what if I win the lottery today? Like, why? Right. But that's human nature. We assume the worst. And if there's a lack of information, we assume it's bad. That's
got to be some kind of evolutionary trait, right? Where it's like, you know what? We're probably going to die today, so let's prepare for all the different ways we can die.
Yeah, the bear, the puma,
right.
the flood.
And it's never like, what would be great is if we actually had an awesome day today. And, that's got to be some kind of evolutionary trait. But, so go back to... I don't know. I'm just saying, like, Thrive Family Medicine is doing something really interesting there, which is like, not only does it cost them nothing to answer these questions that patients may or may not even think to ask or want to ask or whatever. It costs them nothing to do that. It's making me more comfortable as a patient to understand why things are the way they are. It also might, but the compounding effects of this are what's interesting to me. So now that I'm aware of kind of of course I'm aware how scheduling works. If I'm late, then I'm either going to get less time with the doctor or the doctor is going to spend more time with me, and therefore I'm aware of that at some level. But when they lay it out like, we have to collect this information because the insurance company requires it, and then the nurse has to get your vitals because we have to know baseline. We want to keep track of that stuff. And then the nurse has to ask you the questions to make sure that the EMR didn't lose any of the data that was input by you beforehand, before you got there. And that's going to take another 10 minutes. And so then we want to make sure that your time with the doctor is at least 15 minutes, which is how we allocate our schedules. And I'm like, okay, I get it. And so it now makes me, less angry about why things are the way they are. It also makes me a little bit more empathetic to the staff. It also makes me a little more empathetic to other patients that are coming, that I'm like, you know what? Me being an asshole and showing up 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late or 15 minutes late and demanding that I still be seen is preposterous, because that's going to impact every other patient the rest of the day. So when I am made fully aware of how that scheduling works, then I actually might become a better patient as well.
It makes you a team player.
Right. Well, the good ones anyway. The ones who are who have some ounce of empathy in them, will do that. So it's like this compounding effort.
Humans are. I believe that humans are generally good, and I think that if you treat them like they're intelligent, we all. I just think it makes them a team player. Also, people love to have insider information. Mm-hmm. So if they know something, if they read the FAQs, and then they hear somebody complaining about it later or whatever, everybody loves to be the one to say, well, actually, I happen to know this answer. And so then, it's a spreading of information, a spread of, everybody being on the same team.
Yeah. So I just think that, I don't know, I would like, I'd like if anyone listens to this podcast. Actually, our audience has doubled in size.
We're at 2 now?
We're at 4.
Okay, hey.
I'm just kidding. I have no idea what our listeners do. But to all 3 or 4 people who actually listen or whatever, I mean, to me, it's just like, we always want to encourage long-term thinking about a brand. And these are simple, easy wins for a brand. How can you close the information gap between what your customer is thinking or feeling versus what you're sharing with them? Now, again, we're not dumb. We're not saying that companies have to be like, well, we're not going to do this thing anymore because we make this amount of money. And by doing this, we're now going to have to shave off $1 off of our profit per unit. And we don't want to do that. And so we're, of course you're not going to say that. There's certain information that has to be, confidential and wordsmith. And we're fully aware of that to do business, to protect yourself from competitors, blah, blah, blah. But there is almost certainly an information gap somewhere in your operation between you and your customer. And the faster you close that, or the more that you close that, the more compounding the effort becomes afterwards. The vitriol is gone. Mm-hmm. Your goodwill, you're building more and more goodwill so that if a mistake does happen, and inevitably a mistake will happen, you have goodwill built in from your customers to see you through that sort of negative impact. So let's say that Spectrum had been like Zappos in terms of their customer service, where it's just like you actually love calling Spectrum because they're just so damn fun and quirky on the phone with you, and they're always, willing to help you out and this, that, and the other. Would your opinion of Spectrum have changed if when Hurricane Helene blew through and you already had warm, fuzzy feelings about Spectrum, and then all of a sudden...
No, because then it feels like, well, this hurricane happened to all of us. We're all in this together.
Right.
Yeah.
You would have a totally different opinion about them, even if they said, hey, this is going to take us at least 3 months to fix because, oops, we forgot to maintain our infrastructure. You'd be pissed about it, but at the same time, you'd be like, you know what? I get it. This was a once in 100-year storm, and, we're all in this together. I will give Spectrum the benefit of the doubt to get this fixed because they've always done the right thing before.
Yes.
Instead, people were shouting negative, really horrible things online. So now, as with everything we talk about here, there is a dark side to this. And this is why I kind of go back to this. This is the problem with honesty. I also think that honesty can be used in a really icky way. You can tell me that I'm just overthinking this and this is just really a terrible, but there are companies who tout and have built their entire brand positioning around honesty. We're ethical, honest about everything. We're open about everything. Mark Cuban's new pharmacy is that way. It's like, here's how much we pay for these, chemicals, products, whatever, and here's our markup, and here's what you're going to pay. That's cool. Love that. But that's kind of their whole brand position of that. He started that company, and that brand is intended to fill a gap in the high cost pharma world, right? Fine. But I want to talk about Patagonia. I do love Patagonia as a brand. I think they've done a phenomenal job of creating a brand position for themselves. They're the outdoor company that cares about the outdoors. Mm-hmm. They put their money where their mouth is, and they support, organizations, and they donate all sorts of money and blah, blah, blah. Now, do you remember in 2011? Now, I know we're going way back here, but 2011, they ran a whole campaign. I think it was Black Friday-ish time frame, and it was "Don't buy this jacket." Do you remember that?
Vaguely, yes.
So they had this huge campaign, and it was like, full page ads where it's like, don't buy this jacket. And it was a picture of, one of their fleeces. And the whole thing was like, don't buy this jacket because here's what it costs the environment in terms of how much water we're consuming, the carbon emissions, the chemicals, all that stuff. And they basically, very honest about what a production looked like. And they spelled it all out in that advertisement. Now, that was truthful. That filled an information gap, of people who care about the environment. Like, what is the cost of this? And but they wrapped it in an ad campaign.
Yeah.
And an ad campaign is specifically designed to sell more stuff. And so what ended up happening was it was a wildly successful campaign because everybody was like, good for you, Patagonia. Love that. I'm going to buy more Patagonia stuff, which actually, went against what the whole ad stood for. Their sales actually did go up. There was research about it. And then the following year, their revenues were up because sales were up. So I don't know. That seems like an example of where they used honesty in a really kind of icky way. Am I just an old man yelling at clouds?
I think they did use honesty in an icky way. I think because of this campaign specifically, especially if it's Black Friday, that gives me the extra ick. But also, if you're being honest and transparent, is it your responsibility what the public does with that information?
Fair enough. I think maybe my beef with it is that they've turned it into an ad campaign.
Yeah.
Instead of it just being part of their day-to-day business.
Yeah.
Like if you went to their website and you clicked on every product and every product always listed the environmental impact of production of that particular product, and that was just the way it was all the time, totally different story. But they chose to do it as an advertising campaign to be like, look how honest we are, buy our shit.
Yeah.
And that feels like that's weaponized honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. Weaponized honesty. That's a good way to say it.
I don't think that's the best way to do it.
I agree with that. There are two campaigns that come to mind for me. One was like, it was an ad campaign, but it felt very PR, not ad, because they didn't show the cars or anything, but it was Subaru talking about how so many of their plants are wildlife reserves.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of in that similar vein where it's like, it will sell more cars. That is the whole point of it, or they wouldn't have put it on a commercial.
Right.
Which obviously is bad for the environment, while at the same time saying we care so much about nature that everything is preserved.
Yeah. Now, and I will play devil's advocate even with my own frustration on this, which is like, how are you going to let people know unless you put out an advertisement about it?
Right.
I am also fully aware of that. I just want to make sure that if you're going as a brand, if you're going to fill this information gap, you need to do it in a way that is in and of itself honest, and do it in a way that is continuous. And maybe that's what it is like, again, if you go to their website, if you go to Subaru's website, they probably have some information about that's what they're doing or whatever. And it's like, don't greenwash me. Don't market, wrap it all in marketing speak. Just tell me what you're doing. Like I understand that if Subaru is like, we know that we make cars, there's an environmental impact to what we produce. We want to work really hard to counter that in every way we can. And since we make cars that encourage people to go out and enjoy adventure and nature, we think the best way we can do that is by making sure that our production facilities are as kind as they can be to the environment. And here's what we're doing about it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's laying out the honesty honestly. I feel like is the better way, because nothing turns me off more than a company being like, if you buy our product, we'll give $1 to this, I'm like, you could also just give your money to the charity instead of trying to get me to buy more so that you can give more.
Which is so ridiculous.
It is. I just feel like
if you actually care about it, then you would be doing it anyway.
Right. So that's my whole thing is if you care about it, and you want to close an information gap, you should be doing it holistically through your brand culture.
Right. And when you said, like, if you don't put in an ad campaign, how is anybody going to know?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you've got a good, solid brand, those threads are throughout your entire
Exactly.
organization, your work culture, your products, everything you do, that thread should be there.
That's it.
And so you should be able to know that without somebody having to be like, bam, ad in your face.
Right.
You know?
And actually, let's go back to Subaru for a second. I mean, like, everybody knows that Subaru is this sort of nature-focused company before they started doing that with their manufacturing facilities. And it's because their brand culture is very well defined, that we are the outdoor.
Yeah. It's everything about them is outdoor and like off-roady performance, but like.
Yeah, it's like you just get this feeling that Subaru is much more interested in hiking and surfing than they are of, like, you know, I don't know what other car companies, were doing.
BMW. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is all about performance, driving, this, that, and the other. But everybody, if you were to say, what is the most nature-oriented car brand out there? I bet a lot of folks would already identify Subaru, which means their brand culture is already doing the threads that you're talking about.
Right.
And so that thing about their manufacturing facilities is just another manifestation of that.
Right. And that's why that campaign did not give me the ick necessarily. Mm-hmm. Also, they didn't like show the cars. There was no like B-roll of the inside of the car. It felt very genuine.
So that's a good example of closing the information gap about what you're doing to reinforce your brand culture through advertising. But I would say that I don't know what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that it didn't give you the ick, I think, because you already knew good and well that is what Subaru is all about.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also did know it was a commercial trying to sell more cars.
Right.
So I don't know. I think it was the brazenness of the Patagonia's approach, which is just like, oh, look at us. We're so honest. We don't even want you to buy our products. But buy our products.
We're putting this out on Black Friday when everybody's going to be.
That just seems, and again, I love Patagonia as a brand.
Yeah, they're great.
They're a wonderful case study in creating a brand that means something, that has a mission behind it, that has an internal and external culture. It's a wonderful brand to look up to. And, I think that was a misstep. And I want companies to know the difference between having it be part of your brand versus an advertising campaign. Totally different things. So let's talk about what it looks like when it's done well. So I think we've given some examples of companies that are doing it well. And even if it's not part of their, per se, brand culture per se, I mean, like, I don't think anybody thinks Duke Energy is a feel-good, friendly, kind of brand culture. But they did the right thing and they did it right. And so whatever. To me, it's just like empower. I feel like if you want to close this information gap, empower everyone in your organization to tell people what they need to hear. Mm-hmm. Tell them what you know.
Saying I don't know is okay.
So you need to tell them what you know as soon as you know it, and tell them what you're going to do about it. I mean, like, it's really that simple. Even if the answer is not great, just like you're saying, even if the answer is, I don't know, but we're looking into it and we'll provide you another update. That's all it takes. Yeah. And so that's really not a heavy lift for a brand to do. I think the heavier lift is making sure that you are comfortable with your culture internally to let your workforce be empowered to do that. Mm-hmm.
Because the heart of it is, it feels disrespectful, right? It just feels like a company treating you like you're just nothing and meaningless, and it's just disrespectful to you as a human being.
Yeah, and so, and it can't be. I mean, even if you're we deal with lots of different size clients. We have very, very small clients. We have very, very large clients, and so we can see it's a lot easier for a small company of, say, a staff of 10 or 20 or whatever to be like, to really tighten up their brand culture and enable this kind of stuff. But what do you do when you're a massive corporation where you have tens of thousands of employees? You might think, well, that ship has sailed. There's nothing we can do here. But I would disagree. I am thinking about, it's funny, I don't United Airlines continues to come up in my conversations, and I don't know why. I think it's because they are a brand that I am intently watching lately, because they used to be so horrible, and we are witnessing them literally climb out of the hole and turn themselves around. And it started with them realizing that they were one of the worst airlines, and they
truly were.
Right,
Yeah.
they truly were, and they recognized it, and now they're on a mission to be the best airline. And I'm watching and I didn't start watching them because I read an article about them. I started watching because they started getting my attention by doing things differently. Now, fast forward to like a couple of weeks ago, I actually did read an article that caught my attention, and it was about the CEO of United Airlines. I think his name's Scott Kirby. I actually don't know
I have no idea
a ton about him, but the article was interesting in the fact that, first off, he's not allowed in Vegas anymore because he counts cards.
That's
He
amazing.
got kicked out. Anyway, so he loves to make big, brash, sort of things. But he is working very hard to turn United around. And one of the things that he has come out and stated at an organization the size of United, which clearly probably has tens of thousands of employees, if not more than that. He said to all staff, like from the C-suite all the way down to the mechanics and, those working out on the tarmac, I want you to pretend that I'm sitting on the airplane as a passenger. Tell me what I need to hear. And I'm thinking, what a wonderful thing to say. And so what he's getting at is like, they're working very hard to change the way they handle communication with delays and all the millions of things that can go wrong with air travel. And there was a system in place where how they identify delays. So like if there's a mechanical problem with the toilet on the airplane, they're going to code that in their management system that's a mechanical problem with the airplane, and that's going to be a 15-minute delay. Well, it also might be that the mechanic that can be available to come fix that might be on another job and might not be available for another 30 minutes. So while it might be 15 minutes to fix the problem, it might be another 30 minutes to get the mechanic there. And so you have all these different, so the pilot or the flight attendant says 15-minute delay to get this toilet fixed, but they're not taking into account all the other things. So the CEO of United is like, tell me what I need to hear. Like, do away with this whole, that's a 15-minute fix, and tell me how long is the whole thing going to take. And if it's going to take an hour, tell me it's going to take an hour. And then when it's done in 30 minutes, I'm pleasantly surprised. When it's done in an hour, hey, those guys told me the truth and we were on our way. Granted, It was a pain in the ass to be stuck for an hour, but it was done. And so I am watching with great interest to see if he can turn that ship around, because that is an enormous organization. And if he can empower everyone in a multi-thousand employee workforce to own that information gap, ability to close an information gap with the customer, then that's impressive and something that most companies should probably be taking notes on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just think that clear, open, frequent communication, there's nothing else that can replace that with your clients, your customers. And I think that for like in his organization, we talk at Slant a lot about brand internally and externally. And I think that like people don't realize your onboarding process, even the environment that you work in, what it looks like, how people maintain the break room, all of those things create this culture, this empowerment, this kind of like, I hate to use military metaphors, but it's like you're making soldiers, you're empowering, you're all marching the same direction, the same goal, the same. And then when you do that with your customers as well, it kind of folds them in. It feels like a common purpose,
Yeah, and it's, I just think that companies have lost the plot, or a lot of brands. Sorry, let's back up. A lot of companies have lost the plot on what really is important, which is you can't be in business if you don't have customers and audience. And so I just think one of the best and simplest ways to do it is communication. And honestly, you can extrapolate this out to literally any industry. I mean, like we've talked so far about we've talked about airlines, we've talked about automotive, we've talked about doctor's offices. We've talked about utility companies.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing about that I think about is construction. If you've ever had any sort of construction work done, how maddening it can be to not understand why there's nobody on site getting something done when they're supposed to be on site getting something done. And it's like so many of the problems can be addressed by simple communication, closing the information gap. So, I mean, it's literally a very simple thing to implement inside of a brand. And it can, and it matters for just about every industry. Full stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when the hurricane came through, there were like some cities that like weren't communicating very well. And their fear was that if they communicated about what areas were bad, that people would like flock out and look at them and things like that.
Right.
That's assuming that your client, your customer is stupid. Like, stop assuming that people are stupid.
Or already assume that your customers or clients dislike you. You
Yeah.
don't want to make it worse. And if you already assume that they dislike you, then where did you lose the plot?
Right. Like, I think that like, just like the FAQs at Thrive, they are assuming that you are intelligent enough that if they provide you with that information, that you will comprehend it, understand it, and do what needs to be done with it.
Right.
And I feel like so many companies act like people are just stupid. Like, how will they know? Yeah. Well, they'll know because you told them, they just, and in today's world where you can communicate in more ways than you ever could have communicated before.
And let's play devil's advocate again. Maybe that's part of the problem is people are just completely overwhelmed with where they're supposed to communicate all this.
Oh, now that's interesting.
I mean, and that's a very real burden. I get that. I was, when you mentioned the doctor's office, how many offices have you been into, where there's a counter or wherever we have to check in or do whatever, where there's like 100 flyers or Post-it notes with things that they want people to know. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's
poster board.
Right. Or there's a new bank that, just got built, on one of my running routes. And, I watched the whole thing get built, and I was like, wow, that is a gorgeous building. And it finally opened up, and everybody moved in, and it was just like stunning. And each time I would pass that building over after they moved in, about, every couple of weeks or so, I'd see some new those little stands, the little plexiglass stands with a piece of paper in it that has something. And this beautiful check-in front entrance lobby situation is now littered with all of these little pieces of paper of like, if, there's now a $15 fee on such and such, or, if you are here to do XYZ, please fill out this form. Or so this is actually a good example of going back to like how to not do it. I mean, like they are trying to close these information gaps.
Yes.
They're clearly saying, we get these questions all the time. Let's put out a little card on the desk that immediately answers that question so that they don't have to ask me.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I feel like is the problem there. It might be frustrating for your front office staff to have to answer the same question over and over and over again. I understand that. But you're only answering that question once for each customer.
Yeah.
And so by putting up 100 little cards all over the place about things that you want people to know, two things are happening. One, you are creating information overload, and some important thing that you want somebody to see is now getting lost because it's yelling at the same volume as 30 other pieces of information. And two, it makes the customer feel like you can't be bothered to answer their question.
Right.
And so I now am not seeing something that's important for me to know as a customer. And two, you're now telling me, do not speak to me.
Yeah.
Because
you've turned yourself from a person into a company.
And there's a third thing, the bank. The reason I was using that bank as an example, that gorgeous front entrance with the beautiful, marble and all that kind of stuff now looks ridiculous because there's all these crappy signs all over the place. Yeah. So there's that too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why, like, you meet somebody in the grocery store and they're like, treat people the way you want to be treated. And then they go to their job and they just like, don't. But isn't that really what it comes down to, is like treat people the way that you would want to be treated. If something is important and someone needs to know it, take the time to talk to, if you are the nurse going into that room or the front end person, treat them as if you were sitting across and tell them what they need to know. Like, let's stop trying.
Close the information gap.
Close the information gap and customers are people too. Companies are people too. Like, let's be people, instead of just behind this corporate.
You know what's funny?
Iron.
You know what's an interesting little thing?
What?
Most of the rest of the world, or at least over in the EU, you know how in America we say things like, the United States, how we'll say things like, Spectrum did this, or Spectrum is a bad company or good company or whatever. Okay, because we treat the corporate entity here in the United States as that, an entity. Over in Europe, it's plural. So Spectrum are doing this.
Ah, interesting.
And the reason why is because they actually do view companies as full of people.
Yeah.
So it's not a singular entity. Now, I don't know if that really changes anything, but it is interesting that like when you look at a company as a singular entity, it does sort of change the way you interact, customer to company, company to customer. But if you talk about, Land Rover are working very hard, to increase reliability, blah, 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 blah. That is the indication that Land Rover is slam full of people who give a damn about their job, we hope, and working very hard to make something better.
Yeah. I think it's
interesting.
Very telling. Yes.
I think it's very interesting. I don't know if that doesn't necessarily change or mean anything, but I just thought that was an interesting thing when you talk about companies being singular entities. So, that's the problem with honesty. I would love to see brands do a better job of closing the information gap where they are not allowing customers to fill that void with the worst case scenario. It's an easy fix. Tell them what you know. Tell them as soon as you know it. And, hope for the best.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a burden. I think it's an opportunity.
I think it's an opportunity. It's a compounding thing, like we've talked about. It makes your customers feel better about the relationship. It can tender some goodwill so that if there is a true problem, they're much more likely, the customers are, to work with you through that problem. It's cheaper to keep a client or a customer than it is to bring on a new one. It's just
it builds that relationship.
I think it's a smart thing for any brand to do. So I'd love to see more of that. You know what else I'd love?
Lunch.
I'm starving.
I figured.